So I've decided that I'm an Alaskan Italian. This is my Alaskan shirt. And this is my Italian shirt. Ferrari, okay. So I'll have to put this here just to remind myself that I'm actually in Alaska. It wouldn't be too hard to remember because in Parma right now it's like 100 degrees. So, okay, so I really struggled with what should we talk about tonight, and I decided that since I'm the one giving the lecture, I get to decide, that I wanted to talk about, I want to continue with this idea that we need to become human. Not that we are, but that there's a process by which we become human, which is the whole point of what we were trying to discuss before. We looked at what's happening with this text and tradition, how the text is interpreted, and what we discovered, of course, is that in that process, there's enough fluidity, enough flexibility that we really need to be asking the question, not, what does John 3:17 mean, but how do I manifest God's presence in my life so that John 3:17 has a meaning. It's not like I'm going to find it in the text, because the text can be read in a lot of different ways. It's that I need to see it in my life, right? What does Abraham Heschel say? Something like, the only witness that people can't refuse to acknowledge is how you live. Everybody can argue with what you say, but how you live makes the difference, right? So I thought, okay, we should look at the fundamentals that are behind this issue of what it means to become human. And one of those is a really, really important idea, and that's about communicating who you really are. So I thought we would look at that for a while. And I'll entertain questions as we go along because it's pretty important. And hopefully we'll get through it by the time we get to the break. Because afterwards I want to talk about something really cool, a rabbinic idea called white fire, black fire. Okay? So we're going to start, the wrong one. We're going to start with the other one that says afraid. There we go. My mistake. I should have said, this is the one we want to start with. Okay, there you go. So, the 366 promises. 366 times in Scripture, it says, do not fear. Right? I suppose that it's kind of important to understand what that means if it's said 366 times. I mean, I don't think there's another concept in Scripture that's reiterated once for every day, including leap year, right? So I think we should take a serious look at what that actually means in Scripture because it directly applies to us. So let's see. 1 Corinthians 13:12. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. For now we know in part, but then I will know fully, just as I have also been fully known. And if that verse doesn't scare you, you don't understand what it said. Because what it says is that you need to be fully known. And I don't know about you, but that's a terrible kind of thing because there is a lot about me that I don't want anybody else to know. To be fully known means to be completely revealed, to be open, to have transparency. By the way, just in case you thought that this was only a Pauline idea, let's go all the way back to Genesis, right? Genesis chapter 2, where the woman is created from the man. The source of the woman is the man. And at the end of the creation, what does it say at the end of chapter 2? It says, and they were naked and not afraid, right? Oh my gosh! That means if we were all just naked, we wouldn't be afraid. No, I don't think that works. It's because we don't understand the word, okay? The word in Hebrew, what's really interesting is in the very next verse where it says, and the serpent was the craftiest of all the animals, it uses exactly the same word. The word crafty and the word naked both come from the same consonantal root, right? Just change the vowels. Like changing clothes. You just change the vowels and you go from naked to crafty. Okay? So here's the interesting thing. That verse, if we understand the full range of the Hebrew, doesn't mean without clothes. Do you know what it means? It means transparent. right? They were naked. They didn't have a second agenda. They weren't hiding anything. They didn't have any lies. There wasn't anything that they were ashamed of. They were completely transparent to each other. And that's why they weren't afraid. The serpent comes along, and the serpent looks like one thing, but has another agenda that's hidden away. That's why he's the same consonantal root. He is disguised. He's not transparent. He's crafty. He has one agenda, and he makes it look like another. And by the time he's done with the man and the woman, Adam takes on the same nature as the serpent because he becomes one who tries to hide himself. Remember that? Yeah. Okay? Oh, you might also find it very interesting. You know, how did Adam hide himself? He just went down to Brooks Brothers, got a nice suit. He looked so good. No, he couldn't do that because he was a Alaskan, a nature guy. He'd have to go to the outfitter, REI or something, and get you. Yeah. Okay. So, how did he try to hide himself? You remember? What does it say? He made a what? Oh yeah, but it doesn't mean fig leaves. In fact, it doesn't even say fig leaves, right? The root of the word comes from a Babylonian idea. This tells you what something's going on in the text, right? Because the people who are writing the story must have known about the Babylonian idea, right? The Babylonian idea is a belt that had all, the root of the word is a belt that has all of the warriors' medals on it. Like when you see a military guy and he's got all of that, graffiti on his chest, right? Okay? So, the point of the word is that he hides himself behind pride. Oh my gosh, it's not fig leaves. He's not trying to hide himself with fig leaves. Does he really think God can't see? I mean, come on. What he does is he uses pride to deflect the fact that he now has a second agenda. He's learned something really terrible about himself. He's learned that he can lie. Right? And now I have to tell you one other really interesting thing that you know from the Hebrew grammar. How do we get on these rabbit trails? Maybe I should just stop. Okay? But I think you'll find it interesting. That's why I'm telling you, okay? When you remember what Adam says? God is two grammatical points. It says, and he heard the sound of God walking in the garden. Stop, wrong, cross it out, okay? I mean, obviously God's incorporeal. He doesn't walk. And when God walks, you don't hear him, right? Okay? So it doesn't mean that. What it means is that he heard the sound of God from every direction. Okay? And of course that means if the sound of God is coming to you from all 360 degrees, you can't get away. Because no matter which way you go, you hear the sound, right? So the idea is not that he heard the sound of God walking in the garden, but that he heard God from every direction and he had to face the fact that he was going to have to confront God. That's the first thing. Second thing, God says to him, what does God say to him? Where are you? But there's two words in Hebrew for where, and the one that God uses is not about geography, right? Remember when Jacob says to Joseph, you need to go and find your brothers and find out where they are? That's geography. That's give me the GPS. God doesn't need a GPS to find Adam, okay? He pretty much knows where he is. The question is not where are you, GPS, but why aren't you here with me where you're supposed to be? Okay? Where are you? Like you're supposed to be right here. Where are you? Okay? You sometimes say that to your children. Okay? That's the idea. God is not asking his location. God is asking why things have changed so that he's no longer in the place that he expected him to be. Okay? That's the first thing. The second thing is, that's the second thing already, right? So I give you the third thing. The third thing is the grammar of what Adam replies. Okay? So let's think about that. What does Adam say? I was naked and afraid. And so God asked him, who told you were naked? Right? He doesn't ask, okay, so where did you buy those clothes? He's asking, why aren't you transparent? Okay? But the interesting thing is the grammatical structure of that sentence. Because I'm going to give you a very technical thing now. You don't have to write it down. Okay? It's called a vav consecutive. It's a kind of verbal tense in Hebrew. It used to be called, now it's called it's conversive. Now it's called a vav conversive, but it was a vav consecutive. Okay? The scholars just changed the definition a few years ago. Okay? And what it is, you know what the vav is? It's a little letter that looks like a little hook. Okay? That letter gets attached to a word, and what's really interesting about it is when you attach that letter to a verb, it changes the verb from a present tense to a past tense, or from a present tense to a future tense. In other words, when you attach the vav consecutive, the verb, which is a present tense, becomes a past tense or a future tense, which means that Adam is really saying, I was afraid, I am afraid, I will be afraid, all at the same time in one word. Oh my gosh, that means Adam is not reporting some event in his life. He's reporting a change in his perception of who he is. He used to be a transparent being, and now he is a fearful being. Do you see what happened? Okay? And of course that's in your Bible because there's a little footnote that says this is a vav consecutive and it means all these things, right? No, it's not in your Bible, but it's on my website. If you looked at that verse and you searched on my website, you would find a discussion about all this grammar and what it really means. Because think how important this is, right? Notice what Adam doesn't say. I've sinned. He never says that. He just says, I'm afraid because I was afraid, I am afraid, I'm now afraid, and I will be afraid. His whole personality has changed, but it has nothing to do with sin. In fact, he never asked for forgiveness. He never even admits that he did anything wrong. It was God's fault and the woman, of course, right? But notice what has happened. Because he is afraid, his perception of who he is has changed. Okay? Yes, of course, he has a broken relationship with God. God can fix that. But his perception of who he is can't be fixed by God. He has to deal with that, right? So afraid and transparent are two opposite things. If I'm transparent, I'm not afraid because you know me. If I hold things back and you don't know me, then I'm afraid. Why? Because you might find out the things that I don't want to talk about. Anybody feel like that? Not just me. Right? It's the human condition, isn't it? In other words, the sin that caused all of this destructive stuff happening afterwards isn't really just about an offense to God. It's not about breaking a commandment. It's about changing your perception of who you are in the world so that you no longer trust yourself or anyone else. Right? Think about that. Right in the story. It's in the grammar. Right? That's, by the way, why you got to know Hebrew. Because nobody has a little note there saying, oh, by the way, look at this cool grammar stuff and all. Right? They just, if you read it in Hebrew, you know that because you see it happening in the grammar. That's not the only case. It happens all over the Bible, but we just don't see it in English. Okay? Because we read, I'm naked and I am afraid. And we think that's what Adam says, but he isn't saying that. He's not saying anything about his condition. He's saying something about his existential experience of who he is. Okay? So I think that means that the 366 times it says, do not fear, are really important because God is underlining how important it is that we stop being afraid of ourselves and of each other. In other words, how are you going to be in God's image if you can't tell people who you are? Does God hide things from you? He doesn't reveal. God is the perfect poker player. He never reveals the card until it's necessary. But he doesn't hide things. What does Yeshua say? Or the prophets even, right? God always reveals what he's going to do before it happens, right? He doesn't hide things. He doesn't sneak up on you and say, gotcha, right? No. God is transparent when it comes to his interaction with human beings. It's right out there in the open, okay? We're the ones who can't handle it because we have this thing going on inside of us called the other agenda, where we're afraid to talk about what we really are like, what we think we're really like, okay? So, let's see what it means to be afraid. Scratch I love this. Scratch the skin of any person and you will come upon sorrow, frustration, and unhappiness. That's from Heschel in Moral Grandeur. Okay? Scratch the skin of any person. Right? That's why I think the greatest evangelical question you can ever ask is not, where will you go when you die, but how's it working out for you? How's that working out for you? Because if you scratch any person's skin, you're going to find unhappiness, frustration, despair, regret, remorse, shame, all those things that we know are inside and we pretend we're good on the outside. Right? Okay? So, the world has forgotten what it means to be human. The gap is widening. The abyss is within ourselves. We've forgotten what it means to be human. What does it mean to be human? To be naked, transparent, and not afraid. Remember, God designed human beings to be transparent and not afraid. The less transparent, the more afraid, the less human. That bites. Because I wanted to think that all I had to do was keep the rules. Doesn't work that way, does it? God's interested in what happens in your character, in your understanding of yourself. God is the master psychotherapist. He's the one who comes along and says, okay, let's talk about that. And he wants to elicit a conversation where you're willing to actually tell him how you feel about yourself. Oh, you think that you're already doing that because you have a prayer life. How many times have you decided you really don't want to bring that up in prayer because, okay? I mean, think about it. We don't pray about the things that really, really, really shame us. Look, theologically, we know God already knows, but it's too difficult to even speak about them, right? So how does that help? If we can't tell ourselves what we're like, how in the world can we tell God? We just assume that he knows anyway. So then, since he knows anyway, we'll just pray about, the new car that we need, instead of all this stuff that's inside that's causing me to feel shame and anger and bitterness and despair and all that kind of stuff that's keeping me from being human. Okay? So let's see what happens. Depression is the world's #1 disease, and happiness is the world's #1 objective. Okay? I don't know how many people I've heard that have just said to me, I just want to be happy. But they're carrying around inside of them all this stuff, right? And since they won't deal with all this stuff, they find happiness is elusive, right? So then they feel depressed. And then they go buy something, right? To make them feel better. And then it doesn't. And so they go buy something else. The whole point is, if depression is the #1 disease in the world, you need to ask yourself, why are people depressed? And it's because, ultimately, I think it's because no one really knows them, right? If I have somebody in my life who really knows me, that I can actually be transparent with, that I can share who I am with, who I really am with, right? All of that burden that I've been carrying, all that emotional trauma, all that stuff that happened to me since I was a little kid, it's not just mine anymore. What do you think Paul meant when he said, bear one another's burdens? Does that mean that you're just going to carry some guy's suitcase because it's too heavy? No, he's talking about the same kind of thing, transparency, right? I have this psychotherapist friend in South Africa, and she used to ask me, when we had these really excruciating conversations, because she's a psychotherapist, right? She's a wonderful woman. And I didn't know her just because she was a psychotherapist. I knew her from all the Torah group down there. But then we would have conversations. And she would ask me, where do you feel safe? That requires a pause. Because I didn't feel safe anywhere. Anywhere. I certainly didn't feel safe with my family of origin. I still don't. Right? I didn't feel safe with my children. That's an amazing thing to say that. Right? I have 2 older sons. They're actually older than some of you. And they have had the most, and I have had the most strained relationship of my life with those 2 boys. Just brutal, just weeping brutal. And I assume it's been the same for them. I didn't even talk to one of my sons for years. Fortunately, God has started to heal that relationship, and it's wonderful. But for a long time, it helped me be one of the depressed guys. Okay? Because no one could talk about it. No one could say. We all pretended it was okay, but it wasn't okay. Right? I mean, I can go through a whole long list of stuff like that. I'm sure you can too. And the longer the list, the less likely we are to share it with God, because we want to be nice, wonderful, obedient children in front of God. We don't want him to say, oh my gosh, that was such a shameful thing you did. I don't want God to say, does he know? Sure, of course he knows, but I don't want to admit that he knows, so that I have to admit that to me that I know. Right? Do you understand how that works? No? Yeah, I think most of us have at one point or another understood how that works. Okay? And what I'm saying is, this stuff is the fundamental of transparent and not ashamed. And that we have to get to if we're going to be human. Because that comes before any of the rest of the actions. Right? What does God say? He makes the man, he makes the woman, he says, great, fabulous relationship, transparent, not ashamed. From that point on, everything goes downhill. Right? I mean, the whole point is God's design was for this really fabulous relationship between each other and between him. Okay? So, oh yeah, and there's this little line. You already know this. Advertising understands this perfectly well, because they just create a culture of dissatisfaction, so that because they're tapping into this thing, they understand that everybody is in some sort of despair, and so they just tap into it and promise that if you brush your teeth with the right toothpaste, all the women will come. Right? Okay? I mean, it doesn't apply to you, of course. You have other things that get promised to you, right? The right makeup, the right eye color, the right clothes, the right shoes, right, etc. Okay? This is not difficult to do when people are terrorized by themselves, right? And when you're not comfortable with who you are, because you have things that you don't want other people to know, then you can get terrorized by this stuff. All I need is an advertisement that reminds you that you aren't good enough. Right? In my household, you weren't good enough unless you had straight A's. And of course, as hard as I worked, that wasn't always possible. And therefore, I wasn't good enough. But it wasn't good enough just to be not good enough, because not good enough wasn't good enough. So no matter what I did, it wasn't good enough. Right? I mean, I can, as long as we're on personal stories, I'm not asking you for yours. But when when I went to Oxford, Oxford was a substitute for a lot of other stressful things in my life that I couldn't deal with. So we went to Oxford. My 2 oldest boys were then very small, 2 and 4. I finished my PhD at Oxford in 3 months. Yeah, I know. I'd been thinking about it for a long time, so it took me 3 months to write it. Oxford had a minimum residency of 2 years. So the second year, since I was already done, I had the privilege of doing all kinds of, basically taking any class that I wanted at Oxford, and I took all kinds of stuff, because you could just go anywhere. You want to take a class on neurophysics? Fine. You want to take a class I took classes at the Ruskin Fine Art Academy. It was really cool, because I could do anything. I was just waiting for the readers to read my material and get it back to me, okay? So, my senior mentor told me that I was the first guy in 27 years that had done this, right? And it's not because I'm brilliant. It's because I'd been thinking about this topic for 10 years before I got there, so I knew what I wanted to write about, okay? Do you suppose that the fact that I did that, when I graduated, I walked down, in the Sheldonian Theater, a very famous place. I walked down, I had my doctoral robes on, I got my degree. My parents didn't come. The most significant academic achievement I've ever had, and they weren't there. And of course, there were lots of excuses: too expensive, too far to travel, because they were in Seattle and I was in Oxford, England, right? All that kind of stuff. But it hurt. Yeah. Because you see, I wasn't good enough, even if I wrote the PhD in 3 months. And I don't know if you've lived with that kind of environment, but it's really painful. Yeah. Now, since then, my parents are both dead, and we've resolved all that issue, but it hurt. It really hurt. That's the kind of thing that there has to be transparency about. I need to be able to say to my parents, that really hurt me. Not, I understand your excuses, because I do understand the excuses, but it still hurt me, right? If without the transparency, it just sits back there, reminding me of what they didn't do. Yeah, it's hell on relationships, that's for sure. So I'm pretty sure God wants us to be transparent, even about those things that have damaged us from our own family, right? Okay, so I don't want to be terrorized by this stuff. I want Genesis, the end of the second chapter of Genesis, to be my life, not the beginning of chapter 3, okay? But the guy who's really crafty, he knows how to do this. All he's got to do is push the button and make me feel how depressed I am over the things that happen in my life, and all of a sudden I'm right back there trying to deal with all this stuff instead of remembering that God says, do not fear. Okay? It's, do not fear is the equivalent of, the other side of it is, be transparent. Right? So 366 times God says, be transparent. We don't read that. We do not fear. So we think, oh, that's great. God is the blessing God. He's the Santa Claus in the sky. He's going to take care of everything. And he doesn't remember my sins. And it's wonderful. And now I feel not afraid. Until someone comes along and reminds you that your parents weren't there. All right. Okay. So let's work on comparison then. Because that's basically the story of my life. I have a younger brother. He's 13 months younger than me. He's a brilliant artist. I'm not a brilliant artist. I can barely draw. He's fantastic. In my growing up family, he was the one who got all the accolades because he was an artist. I was the oldest, so I just had to do everything right, which didn't work out too well when I hit him with the shovel. Right? You can see what's happening here, right? I'm telling you the story of my life, but I'm pretty sure that you have stories like that too, right? Unless you're an only child, in which case you just can beat up on your parents. Yeah, afterwards, after they can't defend themselves. Okay, comparison is the death of contentment. Did you know that? Yep. I'm sorry, but you can't be like Mike. There's only one Michael Jordan in the world, and no one else can be like him. And by the way, there's only one Dave, and there's only one Art, and there's only one Patty, and there's only one Heather, and no one else can be like you. Isn't that wonderful? No, actually, most of us think, isn't that terrible? Because we see how wonderful these other people are, and if we could just be like them, oh, they're so spiritual. Oh my gosh, they're so successful. Oh, good grief, God is just taking care of them and bless them so much. If I could just be like them. Sorry, it ain't going to happen. Because God has uniquely given you a role that no one else can ever do. And remember we talked about trees? The oranges that come from your tree are only your oranges. There might be other orange trees in here, but they won't taste the same. If you don't produce what God intended you to produce because you're uniquely you, then all of us will starve. right? So, transparent means not afraid. Not afraid means willing to do exactly what God wants me to do and no one else because God wants me to do it. And I don't have to justify it to anybody else either. Right? When we first moved to Claremont, Florida, we were going to a very small church there, and it's hard for people to have me in a church. But nevertheless, I got to be pretty good friends with the pastor. Maybe that's because I had a yellow Ferrari, and I took him to conferences in my Ferrari, and so then he could see, the other pastors would see him getting out of my car. Okay. I don't have those Ferraris anymore. Life changed. But there was a woman in that church who felt that God had called her to a particular ministry in the church. And that particular ministry was driving the bus to pick up children. Okay? She knew that God wanted her to do that. Well, guess what? The church didn't need her to do that. The church needed somebody in the nursery. So she got assigned to the nursery. The church basically ignored who she was because they had a task to be fulfilled. Right? I wrote a book about this once, spiritual terrorism, because it denies who you are in order to meet the needs of the organization. Right? How many of us work exactly like that? How many of us actually do something that's passionate about who we are in our economic activity? Right? Do you suppose God designed you to go to an office that you can't stand being in just because you need a paycheck? I don't think so. I think that the word avodah, which means to work, also means to serve and to worship. Right? So if your work isn't serving and worship, something's wrong, because God's design was to not be afraid, be transparent, understand who you are, and avodah, work, worship, and serve. Okay? It's pretty cool. It's all in, and by the way, that's still in the second chapter of Genesis. Did you know that? He says he creates man, and what did he do? He put him in the garden to what? Oh, it says to till the garden, but that's not the word. The word is avodah, to work and worship and serve. Right? Serve the earth, worship God, do what you're supposed to do. Yeah. Okay? So, Western culture is a constant reminder that you didn't make it. As soon as you start comparing yourself to someone else, or as soon as your parents compare you to your siblings, or as soon as anybody that you're around says, well, if you just be a little better like him or like her, you're immediately done. You're finished. Because you can never be good enough. Right? If you're going to compare yourself to somebody else, you won't make it. Right? What you need to know is who God knows you are, so that you can know who you are because God knows who you are, and do that. And by the way, if everybody in this room just did that, we would all feast. Because all of these trees would be producing for everybody else. Oh, it would be so awesome. It would be exactly like the community that God intended us to be. But what do? Can't share those oranges because, my gosh, you might bite into them and be sour. All right? Maybe I need a little sour orange once in a while. All right? So the whole point is, if I withhold, if I keep back because was afraid, am afraid, will be afraid, the fruit that I produce isn't going to be the pure stuff that God wants, and I'll starve all of you to death. Right? I'll diminish the world because I'm not willing to learn what happened in Genesis chapter 2. All right? So let's see. Happiness is a byproduct. Right? Real simple. If you chase happiness, you'll never find it. It's the end of the rainbow stuff. Okay? How do you get happy? By doing something else and discovering that you love it. That's what it amounts to. In other words, God designed the world so that you do things. It's an active, creative enterprise. Chesed, right? It's relational, transitive, active, okay, got it? Reciprocal, all that kind of stuff. And what happens when you do that? I'll tell you what happens. I was in Haiti once for a project to drill wells, okay? And there was this little tiny village up Ranquit, up in the mountains. To get there, we had to use four-wheel drives. It took about 3+ hours. It's only 12 miles, but the roads weren't roads. You know, I mean, just really, really horrible. Okay, so there was a woman there who had started a mission, and she had a birthday, her 80th birthday. She'd been there pretty much her whole life. And it was she had the only school for 48,000 children in the valley, okay? They obviously didn't accommodate 48,000 children. They could only take 800. But she had managed that whole thing. And so we had a birthday party for her. And she said to me, somebody asked her, what do you want for your birthday? And she said to me, a road. And I thought, I can do that, okay? So I went back to Orlando. I called a bunch of people that I know were, fairly well off and had charitable hearts. And I said, we need to build a road. No, that's not what I did. The mayor of the little town, Ranquit, came to me and he said, please don't go back to the United States and get a bulldozer and a road grader and a crew in here and build a road. How long will it take? 2 weeks, 3, maybe? It's only 12 miles, right? And we're not talking about paved highways. We're just talking about a graded road. He says, don't do that. Because if you do that, it won't be our road. It'll be your road. Okay? And the people that you bring in to do this job won't have any economic impact on our community because you're bringing everything that you need. Right? Let me help you build the road with the people who live here. I said, perfect. How should we do it? His name was Duvalier. Right? So I said, how should we do it? He says, easy. I'll hire the crew, 100 men who have no work. It's Haiti. There's no jobs. Okay? I'll hire the crew. You pay them $2 a day, and we'll build the road. It took them 3+ months. I have a video on my website. It's so cool. They're singing as they do their picks. So all together, they're singing a song and then into the ground. And then they sing some more and then into the ground. It's awesome, awesome video, okay? Because what happened is they built the road themselves, okay? And we kept 100 families alive for 3.5 months by paying them $2 a day. And by the way, we had to bring the money in suitcases into Haiti in $1 bills because you couldn't trust the banks. And if they ever figured out that we were taking money there, they would have stolen it all, right? So we had to just, had to go down there with food packed on top of all the money and try to get, all this crazy stuff, right? In order to pay these people, okay? Here's the best part. The next hurricane that came along, our road, their road, was the only road that didn't get washed out. Right? Because they built it. They knew what the climate needed. They knew how to do it, okay? So we did what God asked us to do through them. We didn't try to manage the whole thing. That wasn't the point. The point was to be a blessing in a way that made a difference to the people who were there. Just like you. You're going to grow your fruit, and you're going to figure out some way to let someone else be blessed by what you do. And that doesn't mean you do it. That means you provide so that someone can do it. Okay? So here's the deal. After I did that, oh my gosh, I was so happy. I wasn't happy because we built the road. I was happy because they built the road. I wasn't looking for happiness. Oh man, I'll feel so good if I build this road because then I can say to everybody, oh, I went to Haiti and built a road. No. I was happy because they were happy. Because they finally had a road. And you know why she wanted a road? Because someone had died in her village who fell from a tree and they couldn't get an ambulance in there. Right? It's all connected to, serving other people. So happiness is a byproduct of doing something else. If I start looking for what will make me happy, I'm not going to find it. I need to look for what does God want me to do to bless other people, and then I'll discover happiness along the way. Isn't that cool? So from God's perspective, the last thing on earth I need to do is chase happiness. He'll figure it out as I go along. Okay? So, right now I need to ask myself, who am I? Who am I right now? Not who will I be tomorrow? By the way, you know that, I introduced you to Zornberg, who's a real academic. She's hard to read. Got really, really good stuff, but she's hard to read. One of the things that she will say to you, if you read her books, is that God designed you to be recreated every day. Do you know what that means? You are not the victim of your past. Isn't that amazing? You don't have to fulfill the past of your life. You can change. You can recreate yourself. He designed you to do that. You don't have to live with all the trauma that became who you were up to the point where you said, God, I can change. Right? So, right now, you are not what you were before. Right? You are not what you were before. I mean, obviously, you have to have somebody to tell you, to tell to who you were, because that's you. Right? I once applied for a job at a Christian university in Florida. It was probably a mistake, but I didn't have anything else to do, so I thought I'd apply for a job there. Okay? And of course, they want the resume and your history and all this kind of stuff, right? So I sent them the resume, and then I sent them the other resume. Okay? In other words, when we write a resume, we always write about all the good things that we did, all the successes that we've had, all of our accomplishments, et cetera, et cetera. So I have plenty of those, so I wrote about them. I sent them the resume. Then I said, just in case you're impressed by this, I want you to realize the other part of me. And I wrote what I called the other resume, which is all about my failures. Because I said, you're not going to hire just the guy who did all this. If you hire me, you're going to get the failures too. So I told him about all the businesses that I'd tried to start and failed. I told him about all the money that I'd lost. I told him about all of the mistakes that I'd made in my life, about bad choices. I said, this is me, okay? If you only want the guy with the degrees and all that kind of stuff, then fine. But that's not me. I'm both of them, right? I didn't get the job. But that was okay. Because I needed them to know that they weren't just hiring the plus side of the equation. Okay? So how many of you have ever written the other resume? Maybe that would be a task. I once assigned that to the bunch of pastors who were in my class at the seminary. They didn't like that. Right? You know why they didn't like it? It wasn't that they couldn't write it. They were afraid someone else would read it. Okay? What keeps us from actually saying, I made some really terrible decisions in my life, and I ruined relationships, and I lost. I'll tell you one of the. I should have listened to my wife. Okay. One of the businesses that I started was a way to raise money for charities, and it was very successful. We did about $50 million of business in a couple of years, and I made personally $2.5 million. Okay, and my wife said to me, because I was investing, and my wife said to me, I think that's a little risky. You probably shouldn't do that. Did I listen to her? Of course not. I'm the man. I know. She doesn't understand numbers. If she understood numbers, she wouldn't buy 20 pairs of shoes. Right? You only need one pair of shoes. You don't need 20. Right? Okay. So, I didn't listen to her. Right? So I didn't listen to her. Right? And about a year after we made all this investment, guess what? It turned out to be a massive Ponzi scheme, and we lost everything. Everything. You know why I don't drive a Ferrari? They had to get sold. You know why? We were lucky that we kept the house. We went from $25,000 a month budget to zero overnight. It was brutal, especially when my wife said, "I told you so." Okay? All right? Think about it. I didn't listen to what she has this intuitive sense about stuff, right? And I thought, well, I'm the one who understands the numbers and it looks good and all that kind of stuff. But she said, something wrong with this. I can't put my finger on it. Of course, if she couldn't put her finger on it, then it couldn't be real. But in fact, she was right. So what happened? Could I still be that person and just mope around and say, oh my gosh, I lost all that money. What a mistake I made. Oh, it was a disaster. I should never do anything again because I was a total failure, and on and on. No, if I do that, I won't ever get anywhere, and God won't be able to use me for anything. And do you know why I'm in front of you today? Because that happened. Right? When that happened, I started to write this little email about the spiritual journey that I was on when I went through this huge depression. And that became today's word. And today's word became the basis for At God's Table. And today I'm before you because $2.5 million went out the door. And you know what? I'm glad. Because I was on a path of collecting Ferraris. Yeah. I'm serious. I built a 6-car garage and my intention was to fill it. Why not? I didn't have anything else to do. My wife would say to me, what's the matter with you? Why don't you just go out and drive one of the cars? And I would say, yeah, but I'm so bored. I didn't have any purpose. So God was generous enough to actually take it all away so that I could start over with purpose. Right? Isn't that wonderful? The biggest failure of my life became the vehicle for serving Him in a way that actually blesses you. So you can praise God that He let me not listen to my wife so that I would lose everything that we had and get on this path, right? I'm not the person that I was before, fortunately, wonderfully. You wouldn't want to know that person. I mean, he was a real jerk, okay? Why do you want to be like somebody else? Why? You can ask yourself. I mean, all my life, I thought I should be an artist because my brother was getting all of the compliments. Why do I want to be like somebody else? That's the first thing I have to ask. What is it in me that motivates me to want to be like somebody else? Why do I compare myself to someone else when God has uniquely made me me, and I'm the only uniquely me in the entire world? Right? Okay? So, self-acceptance begins with the difference between truth and fiction. Okay, here it is. Oh, I have no sound. Sorry. We have to go back. I have to have sound. Where's the sound guy up there? You see? He already screwed up. Okay. And now he's feeling really bad because I made that comment. But you know, I'm just thankful you're there because I don't want to have to walk up there to try to figure this out. Are you ready?
Well, this is a difference between truth and fiction. Fiction has to make sense.
I love that. Remember that one. There's a difference between truth and fiction. Fiction has to make sense. Your life, as it bears the truth of God, doesn't have to make sense. If your objective is to make your life make sense, you're writing fiction. Right? Why? You think that's funny? Yeah. That's because it's true. Don't be a fiction novel. Be a non-fiction representative of the God who doesn't make sense. Isn't that wonderful? You are so free now. You don't have to make sense out of your life. It doesn't all have to work out. It doesn't all have to have meaning because it's not fiction. Okay? So, self-acceptance begins with Brené Brown, The Gifts of Imperfection. What an important book. Right? Brené Brown, somebody that you have to know. Brené Brown. If you haven't seen on TED Talks her discussion about compassion, you have missed probably one of the most significant 20-minute lectures you'll ever hear. right? Yeah, it's awesome. If you haven't seen it, make yourself a note right now. TED Talks, YouTube, Brene Brown, Compassion. She wrote the book, The Gift of Imperfection. And boy, it is right on target for what the Bible talks about. She never says it's from the Bible. She probably never will. She's a recovering drug, alcohol, the whole long line list of addictions, just like all of us who sit up here in these chairs, right? And her view is, until I learned that imperfections are human, right? I drove myself from one objective to the next to prove that I wasn't human. What she means is to prove that I was perfect. And since you can never be perfect, there's only one thing that can happen when you live according to the God of perfection: failure. That's it. Okay? So, does the world outside embrace your faults? Are you transparent enough so somebody knows how badly you've screwed up? Right? Are you pursuing living by your own uniqueness, including your failures? Do you have two resumes? The one that looks polished and nice and the other one that says, this is really me? Okay? If they're really failures, what does that imply? I mean, they aren't failures, are they? What does the Chinese philosopher say? That which does not kill us makes us stronger. Right? I mean, a failure isn't a failure. It's only a failure by somebody else's assessment. A failure is just an opportunity for growth. Right? We have a hard time dealing with that because when we quote unquote fail, we think everybody else around us is so successful and they're looking at me and they think I'm no good. That is the comparison model going on in my head, telling me that I'm not unique. I need to be measured according to a standard that God has in mind, which I can never meet, and therefore, it's Ecclesiastes. Why try? You're just going to get buried next to the guy who didn't do anything. Okay? We don't want that. What we want is this, of course. Matthew 5:48. So what does Matthew 5:48 say? Oh my gosh. Does God really think that you're supposed to be perfect? What does it say? Be therefore perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, right? Of course, it's a quote from Leviticus. It doesn't say that in Leviticus, but nobody told you that. They just quoted it in Greek as though it were Greek, but it's not. It's Hebrew. Go look at it in Leviticus. What does it say in Leviticus? Because Yeshua is not just making this up. He's quoting from the 5 books of Moses, Leviticus, and the verse is right in there. And what does it say? Be therefore holy. I'd rather have perfection. I mean, holiness, come on. Give me a break. To be holy, never do anything wrong at all. I can't possibly imagine that. It's as bad as perfection. So now I really need to go ask myself, what in the world is God saying? If he says I have to be holy, how can he expect me to be holy? I'm human. Right? There was a plan A. I'm in plan Z. Okay? I've every plan God's given me, I've messed up. I'm way down the line. I'm Z to the 10th power. Okay? So forget perfection and forget holiness. Oh, what happened? By the way, do you know that the Bible never says that God is perfect either? Isn't that interesting? Really? Yeah, cool. Aquinas told you that God was perfect. That was one of the via negativa. Remember the via negativa? All the things that you are not. Okay? So you're in God's image in all the things that you're not. But no, God doesn't say, no place in the Bible does it say God is perfect. Right? We came up with that idea because it's a philosophical concept, not a theological one. Okay? What it says is, that's Luther and the boys. Luther and the boys came up with that one. And they nailed it down really good. So now you can feel guilty the rest of your life because you aren't perfect. And if you don't believe that, ask your wife. Okay. All right? So here's the deal. It doesn't mean perfect because the verse in Leviticus means holy. And holy doesn't mean without blame, sinless, absolutely perfect. You know what it means? It means devoted. Right? There's a book by Matthew Wilson. I don't think it's still in print. It's not in print because Matthew moved to Israel, and he couldn't have a book that had a Christian base to it, or they wouldn't let him in the country, even though his wife is French-Israeli. So they took it off the market, okay? But I have a copy of it, and it's awesome because he was a forensic scientist, and he went through and said, okay, let's find out what this word really means in its use, not in the dictionary, but how it's used. And what he discovered is holy means devoted. So what is God saying? Be devoted to me as I am devoted to you. Right? Be just as much for me as I'm for you. Can you do that? Can you be holy? I don't think so if it means sinlessly perfect. But if it means devoted, I think you can manage that. Right? Okay? So that's really cool because God and Yeshua are not telling you that if you aren't perfect, you won't make the grade. What they're saying is, be devoted. You know, go for it. Pursue God. Oh my gosh, that reminds me of something that we talked about yesterday. The meaning of Israel. What does it mean? Oh, you can't tell me? You all failed. What does Israel mean? To fight, to wrestle with God and man, and persevere. It doesn't say win. Persevere means you stay alive. It doesn't mean you win. Did Yaakov win in the battle? No, he got to hobble around the rest of his life. Actually, it doesn't mean that. Are there any children in here? No. Good. Because it doesn't mean that the man won by touching the side of his hip. Okay? Because that's not the word in Hebrew. Okay? Do you remember when Abraham sends his servant out to get a wife for his son? He has him say a vow. Okay? How did he initiate the vow? Do you remember that? You don't have to remember that. It doesn't apply to you. Right? He said, put your hand under my thigh and say this vow. In other words, grab the balls, and if you mess up on this vow, I'm going to take them from you. Okay? That's essentially what it means. Okay? That's how they did vows in the ancient world. You know, you were risking something very important. Okay? Okay? So when that man touches the thigh, that's not how he wounded Jacob. He wounded Jacob in the same way that Abraham had a vow. Right? And by the way, you can see that if you follow the word through, like, what is the word in use, right? It's like devoted, right? You got to go look at how it's used, not how the dictionary says, and certainly not how the guys translate it. They cleaned it up a lot. You have a question about that? Yes. No, it's coconut water, as advised by my therapist, who tells me that I need to sip this in order to have the proper electrolytes in my system so that I can actually talk about what happened to Jacob. Okay? Okay, so Luther and the boys come along and convince you that what God wants is holiness. And what they mean, of course, is perfection. Right? What's really interesting is even in the Greek, the word in Greek is teleos. Even in the Greek, it doesn't mean perfect. You know what it means? It means complete. So think of it like this. Even in Greek, Yeshua wasn't speaking Greek, but if he were, he would have said, be complete as I am complete. What does he mean? Go to the finish line. Keep going. Don't stop. What does it say in 12 steps? Don't stop 5 minutes before the miracle happens. Right? Persevere. Where do we hear that word before? Israel. Keep going. Right? The fundamental message of the Bible is keep on trucking. It's as simple as that. Right? Keep going. Sure, everything isn't going to work out in your life. And sometimes you're going to wonder if God is even there. Abraham and David. Right? And sometimes you're going to say, what's the matter with you, God? I thought you were supposed to take care of me and you're not doing it. But the idea is persevere. Keep on trucking. Okay? Sanctification. What a wonderful term. Okay? Look at all these people. They're taking pictures so that they can remember what it said. I want you to do something for me. Go ask him. Because he's got all this stuff up on the computer there, and all you have to do is say, hey, Pat, I don't remember what that long paragraph was about sanctification. Why don't you send me the PowerPoint? And he will do that. And because it's on a Mac, if you have a Windows machine, he will convert it to Windows so that you can get it, right? Huh? Yeshua speaks, okay, this is from Matthew Wilson's book on holiness. The name of the book is The Simplicity of Holiness, okay? Yeshua speaks to those who are already hear him. What does he say? My sheep hear my voice, right? Okay? This means that they are already saints. They're not becoming saints. They already are. Oh my gosh, this is impossible. Think about all those corrupt Corinthians. They were a mess, right? How does Paul address them? To the saints in Corinth. What? Saints? Are you kidding me? What does saints mean? On the way. On the way somewhere. Okay? In other words, you're a saint if you're on the right path. You might not be finished yet, but you're on the path. Okay? So he says, citizens of the kingdom, followers of the Messiah. They are not on the path toward sanctification, right? They are already sanctified because they're on the path, right? That's why they hear. They are already attuned to the voice of the Messiah. Since holy means devoted, holiness already incorporates the idea of sanctified. If you're devoted, you're on the right path. Just keep trucking, okay? We hear because we are already accepted. Oh my gosh, you want to underline that one? We hear because we are already accepted. Do you hear the voice of God? That means he already accepts you. Do you have to compare yourself to somebody else to be good enough to be accepted? No, because you hear the voice of God. If you don't hear the voice of God, maybe you need to reassess what's going on inside. Because God put you on the path, right? He didn't say, okay, Dave, fill out all these forms and then we'll decide. You can get the stamps of approval before you can get on the path. No. He called, you answered. You're on the path. Okay? And what's more important is, as long as you're on the path, you are sanctified. Right? Or you wouldn't hear him. Progressive sanctification is a theological idea that comes from a doctrine of perfection. Perfection is the single most damaging doctrine the church ever came up with. Because it basically excludes all of you, except me, of course. Right? If God wants perfection, no one will make it. I won't make that other comment. Okay. As Wilson says, we do not follow his instructions to become holy. We follow his instructions because we are holy. We do not follow his instructions to become devoted. We follow his instruction because we are devoted. Okay? Because we are dedicated to following him. Devotion to God and his Messiah means hearing what he says, not as a condition of acceptance, but as a fact of inclusion. Isn't it nice to know God is not testing to see if you're going to make it? Right? If you hear what he says, you already got there. Now it's a matter of fulfilling the destiny that he has in mind for you. Right? You don't have to prove yourself to God. You just have to become the fruit tree that you're supposed to be. Okay? And by the way, a lot of times weeds are going to get in the way. Lots of them. Sometimes the weeds are higher than the tree. But the tree is still there. Just keep trucking. Okay? So, the truth. I am a mistake-making being. That's me. I am a mistake-making being. Anybody who thinks that I'm perfect doesn't know me. You know, my name is not Skip. You know that, right? That's my nickname. Okay? My legal name is Arthur. When somebody calls me on the phone and says, "Is Arthur there?" I know that they don't know me. And I don't know them. They're trying to sell me something. So I can always say, "No, Arthur's not here right now. Did you want to talk to Skip?" No. Okay? Right? It's nice to have a nickname that isn't connected to like Bill and William, right? Because if somebody asks for Arthur, I know for sure that I have never met them and they don't know who I am. Okay? I quarantine those mistakes because they reveal the imperfections of who I am. But you know something? The imperfections are my resume. That's the wonderful thing. Do you think God can do anything with a perfect person? That's like me saying, if you already knew all this stuff, what are you doing here? Right? If you already know all this stuff, why show up? You're not learning anything. I'm not learning anything. Go home. And now everybody will stand up and leave. Okay? I believe that I should be perfect. That's the problem, isn't it? I've been taught in the Western world, and particularly since Luther, that I should be perfect. And so I start measuring myself against a standard which cannot apply to any human being ever. Right? I measure myself against a standard that's not human. Right? As a result of which, I don't make it. And so since I know I can't make it no matter how hard I try, why try? Might as well just have a coconut water beer. Right? The whole point is God doesn't want you to get into the I'm defeated before I begin. You know, there's this great Spanish poet, and he's a playwright maybe. I can't remember the exact name now, but if you go to my website, you can find it. Okay? And he says, man's greatest sin is to be born. Right? Because if you believe in original sin and you believe that you come into the world designed to sin so that God can punish you, then the worst thing can ever happen in your life is to be born. Right? And the church taught that for hundreds of years. No wonder we think that we need to be perfect. Right? Yes, dear.
Is it on? Okay, thank you. What you're saying.
No, nice and loud so that I can hear you.
What you're saying is really.
No, scream it out so I can hear
really
you.
scream it out. Okay.
Yes.
What you're saying is really resonating because most people in the church have continually been reminded of what a sinner they are. And I've been a Christian for 36 years, and my mom has terminal cancer, and we talked today, and she's been a Christian for 35 years, and she's scared to die because she doesn't think she did enough. She wasn't good enough. There's no love. There's no in the end, did God love me? Is it enough? What do I need to do? Am I going to hell? And I understand that feeling so what you're saying is, how do you deprogram this? And from us, because what I realized a long time ago, she didn't, but I did, is that this doctrine that we've been force-fed is not true. It can't be, because where's the love? And it doesn't do anything to compel you to know him or to be better because you're cowering in fear. And that the truth of it is what you're saying is because when someone's dying and they've been a Christian for 30 years and don't know enough of God's love to make that transition,
Sure.
It is heartbreaking. And so I just appreciate what you're saying.
Thanks.
Because we need to hear it, and we need to hear that there's love. And I really thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm crying with you because it's the kind of place, the household that I grew up in. My mother read the Bible every day. My mother loved God, okay? But she grew up in a world of perfection. And her sons all had to be perfect, and we weren't. The greatest failure in her life was to have imperfect sons. We were just human. Yeah. I mean, we all struggle with this stuff. I'm not talking about something that you don't know. Maybe I'm just articulating it. Because we all struggle with this stuff. We all came out of an environment that, by the way, goes back 2,500 years to Greek philosophy, which convinced us that we had to be perfect. It wasn't good enough to be good enough. Right? What if you believed that God's real intention for you was to be good enough most of the time? Right? There's a lot of flexibility in that. So I can have a really bad day, and God says, okay, but you're good enough most of the time. Can you live with that? I mean, doesn't that when I even say it, there's parts of me that are going crazy saying, how can you say that? How can you say that? You need to be perfect. You need to be perfect. Yeah, I have to stop playing the mother tapes in my head. Maybe you have to stop playing the father tapes. All that kind of stuff that went on from generation to generation. What did we say yesterday? Right? Pain passes through generations until someone is willing to bear it. But it's not just physical trauma. It's not just emotional stuff. It's spiritual as well. Pain passes through generations until someone's willing to bear it. So today you have a chance to bear it because you can ask yourself, do I really need to be perfect in order to be in front of God? Will he accept me? Will he love me? Will he want me to be who I am? Seems to me that all those biblical stories are about people who made really bad mistakes. And he somehow worked with them anyway. Right? Okay, what if you wrote a different resume? Personality is me in action. It's not some of my actions, it's all of them. So I need to write the other resume which says, oh my gosh, look at all the rest of me. Okay? I mean, you go on my website and it'll say a little bit about Skip Moen. He's got 5 degrees, he did this, he did that. I came up with all these ideas, did all the wonderful stuff. I'm not about to put the other resume on a public website. I don't need that kind of criticism because I don't want people to know about the other resume. I'll send it off to you if you ask, but that's only if you ask. And if we have a mutual contractual agreement that's called what's it called? A non-disclosure agreement, right? Right. I'm just like you. I don't want people to know about all this stuff, okay? So when I look in the mirror, when you look in the mirror, who do you see? Do you see a friend? Right? Do you see a competitor? Do you see a judge? Right? When you look in the mirror, who do you see? Ready? Do we have sound? Here we go.
Maybe I'm in the wrong line of work. Maybe I should take on something less challenging.
Okay, stop.
You do what you are, Jesse.
Let's go back. We're going to do it again because I need more volume. They got to hear this, and she doesn't talk very loud. Okay, ready?
Maybe I'm in the wrong line of work. Maybe I should take on something less challenging.
You do what you are, Jesse.
You mean you are what you do?
No, I mean, you do what you are. You're born with a gift. If not that, then you get good at something along the way. And what you're good at, you don't take for granted. You don't betray it.
What if you do betray your gift?
And you betray yourself. That's a sad thing.
There you go. See, even Hollywood sometimes has great lines. You know what that movie is? Yep. Along Came a Spider. Oh, yeah. This is, what? She's bad. Yeah, she's the bad one. But this is a really, really cool thing to say this. You do what you are. Right? So what's the Bible all about? Discovering who you are, because once you know it, you will do it. It's the thing that brings passion into your life because it is who you are. It's the thing that will produce happiness because you're doing what you were intended to do. It's the thing that will remove the competitiveness, the comparison, the depression because you're doing what you are. That's me right now sitting up here talking to you. This is who I am. It's great. I love it.
It's your identity. It's who God says you are, not who man says you are, not who...
Yeah, but you got to discover it. It doesn't come, you weren't born with this little tag on the side that said, you are such and such. You have to discover it along the way. How do you do that? The first thing you have to do is unhook from the culture that tells you you have to be like somebody else. Unhook from the culture that says you're not good enough. Unhook from the culture that teaches you that being born means you're sinful. Right? All those things have to be unraveled before you can get to the point where you realize when God says, do not be afraid 366 times, he means be happy with who you are because I am.
But it's at that moment of when you get to that point where, because you don't even know who you are because of your upbringing.
Okay, stop. I'm going to repeat what she says because I want you to hear it. She said, you already know who you are because of your upbringing. But I would say exactly the opposite.
You know who you've been told you are. You believed it. You believed you had to be a perfection because that's who they were.
That's right.
You couldn't keep up. You couldn't do that. Do you want me to do it? But you tried. But until you knew exactly who God, when you were introduced to God, or when He came into your life,
Yes.
He told you who you are. And that instant, that moment of identity, He says, He loves you. I accept you just as you are.
Yeah. That.
And you are who I say you are.
Yes.
You are perfection. I created you in my image.
Yes.
You are not who your parents who say you are, or any man or woman or demon from hell. Your identity comes from God. If you got that in your heart and your mind,
You're right. Except God can say that to me, and I can not hear Him because the other stuff is so loud that it overrides His telling me, you're fine like you are, I love you like you are exactly my child, and I have designed you to be like this. And I don't hear it all because the other tapes that are going on in my head are, you have to be better, you have to be good, you have to be perfect, you have to be like this, you have to be like that. So until I get to the point, you're right, God can be telling me that.
God is
But-
love. God is, all you have to know, God is love. You are created in my image. It's telling you right there.
Yes.
I created you in my image.
Yes, but the problem is most people can't hear that, right? If in fact people could hear, you're created in my image, I love you, God is love, then we wouldn't be struggling with depression, anger, resentment, bitterness, all that. We wouldn't be, right? Because it would all be cleaned up as soon as we realize that God loves us just like we are. But the fact of the matter is, we go right on these roads following all this stuff that we've been fed for 1,000 years without realizing that it didn't come from God. It came from someplace else.
Why do you say you go on for 1,000 years? No, you cut that off. You quit going on that road. You stop and
Maybe
turn.
you're better with
and
the
go on the
axe.
road the road He has
Absolutely.
for you.
Maybe you're better with the axe
Shed all
than I am.
that baggage you're packing around with you
Yes, but
since
it's not so
childhood.
easy to let go of all that baggage when it means that I'm letting go of the identity that I think I am. You're right. I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yeah, it's just taking you longer.
Yes, it's taken me a lot longer. Taken me a lot longer. My observation is that it takes most people a lot longer. You know, we think, here's the problem. We think that God's intervention in our life is so that we're saved. But you discovered yesterday that the purpose of salvation is to become human. And this is what it means to become human. So it's not like, oh, I'm saved, I'm going to heaven. No, I'm sorry. I have to learn to become human. And that means unraveling all this stuff that keeps me from being transparent, even with myself. Right? Okay? I'm not disagreeing with you.
It's a season we're all in. When He's done working on that part, that peeling that onion back, and He reveals it to you, you say, oh, yeah, okay. Then He says, okay, son, I am going to let you rest the season, go on your merry way. And then the next season comes up, and He says, oh, it's time to work on that onion. Let's peel it back deeper.
Yeah.
But then, so if you get stuck, that onion will never get peeled back.
You're right.
There's going to come a time in your life when you get so sick and living this way, it's like surrender. And let God peel the onion back.
Yeah. Not so easy.
It is. It's that easy.
Ah. Okay.
I mean, I go through stuff too, but I know who I am.
But you're way ahead of the game if you know who you are.
Who I am and whose I am.
Yes.
No, I grew up. I didn't know the Lord till I was in my 20s. Thank God for that. I didn't grow up in a church that wounded you or give you all this misinformation. Hallelujah.
Okay.
But I grew up in a dysfunctional family.
Shall we move on?
Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah, but we all have that. And fortunately, you've come to the point where you have transitioned away from that. You've made the leap. So here's the best part. You don't have to listen to what I'm talking about because you're past it. I'm trying to help all of the rest of us, like me. Yes.
Yeah, he's still working on that onion
Yes.
until I take my last breath.
Yes. So wait. You take your last breath to becoming human, not to perfection.
I'm human to be like Jesus.
Yeah, but you are like him. That's what we learned yesterday. You are like him every time you show compassion, every time you withhold anger, every time you show sympathy, every time you act in ways that God acts.
Sure, and you'll be doing that till you take your last breath.
Yes.
Just a list of language here, but I understand.
Okay. Good, because I want to go to the next one. The original treasure is your uniqueness, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You do what you are, but who are you? Well, there's a storehouse. You can revise your story, right? Your story hasn't ended today. It can be revised. You have flexible memory, which means, and we all know this, because you might remember things differently than I do, even though we were both there. We have flexible memory. Flexible memory means that I can have flexible memory about me, too. Okay? And there are traumas in our lives. And traumas are, if you read any of the literature on trauma, traumas are like little frozen icebergs. Right? What happens in a trauma is that the experience of the trauma gets frozen, so that any time a trigger comes along, which is emotionally related to the trauma, it's as though you're really reliving it. You can't, in other words, the whole point of therapy and trauma is to integrate it into a story so that it can be articulated, because traumas are pre-verbal. You can't actually say what it is, you just feel it, and it locks you up. Okay? So do you think God's interested in that? Of course he is. He wants you to have an articulated story about who you are and who he is in your life. And that means you're going to have to deal with those traumas, those icebergs that are floating along. And they're not so easy to deal with. If they were, we wouldn't have trauma. Okay? Which means that you need somebody else to know what you feel, because you can't tell what happened to you. That would be verbalizing it. You just feel this way. When this and this happens, something happens in me, and I just feel like that. Okay? And of course, what that means is God feels it too. Right? God is the God of our emotional lives. That's what really matters. The God of our emotional lives. We have 2 minutes to get through the rest of this 40 slides, so we're not going to do it, right? We're only going to get to this. If you aren't safe, you can't progress. If you don't have a place where you're safe, where you can talk about how you feel, where you can really let go of the things that have been secret and hidden away, you can't progress. You're stuck. You know, the other parts of your life can be successful. You can travel all over, you can have businesses, you can do it. But inside, your identity is tied to the ability to be transparent so that you won't be afraid. And in order to do that, you have to have a safe place. And most of the places that we frequent are not very safe. Unfortunately, the church tends to shoot its wounded. Okay? So you need to find a safe place. Hopefully it's here. You need to find a place where you can be who you are without people, without that little flash of light that goes through the eyes when you know that they're judging you. Right? You need a safe place where there's a willingness to hear how you feel. Okay? And, of course, how can we really love somebody if we don't feel safe? So it comes down to not just the community, but my individual relationships with people. If I don't feel safe, I can't share who I am. And who I am is the emotional me, right? It's not just all the outside stuff that everybody sees that I manage so well. It's the emotional me. It's the inside stuff. If I don't have a safe place for that, I can't be who I am, which means that I'm afraid, which means that I'm not transparent, which means that I'm not being human. Genesis chapter 2. Okay? So, it's impossible to find self-acceptance without the acceptance of others. There has to be some place where I'm safe enough for you to know me. And isn't it nice that I'm going to get on a plane and fly away to Italy? Because I don't have to stay here so that you actually know me. All right? Isn't that nice? I can just run away. And a lot of us do that. We just run away because it's too dangerous to actually be real. Okay? So, Luzzatto, this is a great book. Mesalit Yesharim. That's the Hebrew title. Okay? The author is Moshe Luzzatto. He's got a middle name. I'm trying to remember what it is. Okay? Mesalit Yesharim. I did a whole study on this book with a small group of people so that we could learn to be safe with each other. And that's all been recorded. It's on there. And you can get his book, which is fascinating because what he claims is that my sense of myself was given to me by others. The sense of who I am was given to me by others. As a result of which, I have an eternal debt to other people because they gave me my self-identity. It doesn't mean that I won't change it along the way, but I owe those people because they made me feel like I was someone. Right? One of the relentless laws of our humanity is that when we give up one pleasure, we must be consoled by a new and, if possible, greater pleasure. Human nature abhors a vacuum. And what we want is to fill that vacuum with the love of God manifested by I'm eating of your trees. All right. So let's see if we can finish this stuff up so that you'll get on to Freedom Night. So James, what does James say? Struggle isn't failure. It's what? It's growth. It's opportunity. It's a blessing from God. The worse your life gets, the better off you are. Right? Think about this. I mean, just think about the practical applications of this. Who are you more likely to listen to when it comes to God's interaction with men? The person who's ultimately successful in everything that they do and life is a silver spoon and the whole? No. Who are you going to listen to? The one who's gone through hell and persevered. Okay? If you want to earn the right to tell people about how God is so important in your life, then expect that he will put you in places where you have to persevere. Okay? In fact, I used to say, I wouldn't say it to this group, but I used to say to my pastor friends, right, that God's idea of blessing is a little bit reversed from ours. Because the people that we say, oh, look how wonderful they are, God has really blessed them, are the people that God knows can't handle it. So he has to use kid gloves on them because otherwise they would fall apart. The people who can really take it are the ones that suffer on behalf of others, which is exactly what the Messiah did. Why do you think, if you're going to follow in the footsteps of the Messiah, that your life should be healthy, wealthy, and wise? Right? I mean, think about it. You want to follow him in his footsteps? Be ready to be executed. I mean, think about it, right? Abused, rejected, despised. Those are the characteristics of someone who's following the Messiah. We have it backwards. God blesses those who can't handle the pressure, and so he uses a soft touch with them. If you're under pressure, it's just God saying how much he trusts you. What? Why do you laugh about that? It's true. Right. So isn't it great? You can change your prayer life. You can say, Lord, please make me suffer more because I want to be close to you. No, we don't do that, do we? But in fact, if we read the Bible, the people who are the closest to God are typically the ones who are suffered the most, right? What made us think it should be otherwise? Okay, perfect. I'm going to skip that one. The fatal secrets. So here we go. 1 Corinthians 13:12, we read, to be fully known. What do we really want then? To be fully known is to be known as the gift of God that I am to you, and that gift comes with all of me. It comes with all of my mistakes and everything else. In fact, the only really unique thing that I can give you is me, broken and everything else. Right? That's the real gift that I am. If I try to smooth over all the parts so that you only get the good stuff, I haven't given you the unique gift that I am. Right? And more than likely, you will think, oh my gosh, that Skip, he's such a spiritual guy. I wish I could be like him. Right? I had somebody in Virginia Beach tell me that just recently. Oh man, you have such a fantastic life. I wish I could be like you. And I said to him, yeah, and you'd get all my struggles too. I don't think you really want that. Okay? So, I usually want to filter the gift so that it'll be acceptable as I imagine what you think is acceptable. Right? But that's not what, I don't have to filter the gift with God, do I, Diane? He knows it all already. I just have to be willing for him to know it all already. He knows it all already, but I have to be willing to say, oh God, you already know all of this. I guess I might as well stop pretending that you don't. Okay? So, that means that your story is made up of your feelings, not your events. You have in fact, there's a great Christian psychotherapist, Paul Tournier, who used to say that all of your life is captured in your emotional history, not in your event history. Who you really are is the tracing of your emotions. Okay? And if you can write down your emotional history, you will be a long way toward understanding how God loves you. Right? Because those are the things that get in our way. Those are the things that we prefer to filter. All right? So, I was intended to communicate this experience to you because, as we discovered over the last 2 days, the Bible is really just stories about people interacting with God and God interacting with them in all of their messiness and everything else. And so it's designed to help me feel comfortable being in a place where I don't have to be perfect. The Bible, if I start reading the Bible like that, take the theology and put it on the shelf. Read the Bible for the stories that are there about the people who are in it. And what will you discover? The same things you need to know. God loves you anyway. It's great if you can talk about who you really are. It's really terrible if you try to compare yourself to someone else. You have a unique position that God wants you to exercise and manifest. Right? All those things are right in the text. All those things are about the human emotions that go along with the text. And so, I have a really great book that will get written someday that's called A Theology of Emotion. And it's about a God who feels. Because the Christian God, according to doctrine, actually doesn't feel. Right? You're looking at yourself like, wait a minute, how can that be? Because the doctrine of immutability, which means that God never changes, has a subset, a doctrine called impassibility, which means God never feels. Why? Because feelings are transitory. Feelings come and go. And if God is immutable, so that nothing ever changes, then he can't have feelings that come and go because that would be a change. You're like, that's so shocking. Go read Thomas Aquinas. In fact, you don't have to read Thomas Aquinas. You can read Berkouwer. You can read Erickson. You can read Geisler. You can read, what's the other guy who does all the standard Christian theological texts? I can't remember his name now. Anyway, pick up a Christian theology and look in the index for impassibility. And you will discover that Christianity has this doctrine. That logically, God cannot feel. Of course, the Bible doesn't say that, but that's because the Bible is anthropomorphic. It's just been modified so that we can handle it. But the real God doesn't feel anything, okay? And what's really interesting is when they came up with this doctrine, which is a logical concomitant of immutability, when they came up with it, The instructions of the sages, the Christian sages, was this: don't talk about this with the congregation because they won't come. They want a God who actually feels things. We know that God doesn't because it's not logically compatible with our doctrine, but just don't talk about it. Okay? Oh yeah, it's all there. Go start digging into Christian theology from Thomas Aquinas on, and you'll find it. Okay? You just never heard about it because no one from the pulpit would dare tell you that God doesn't feel a thing, because he's always the same. Right? Because Christian theology defines immutability as perfection, and perfection means nothing can be taken away or added to. If you took something away, it wouldn't be perfect, and if you had to add something to it, it means it wasn't perfect already. So, since emotions change, God can't have emotions. Isn't that a lovely thing? No. Don't you just absolutely want to worship that God? But that's the whole point, isn't it? Because Christian theology deals with the Bible, and then it says, this can't be true because we have this theology over here that says it can't be true. So why does the Bible have all that stuff about God feeling things? That's what they call anthropomorphism, which means that they modify the text so that it'll be palatable to you. But they all know that it can't be true. They just didn't tell you. So isn't it lovely that you finally moved away from all of that and you actually have a God who feels things, right? Because in Jewish circles, God identifies with his people all the time, which means that he is intimately, eminently involved in human processes, right? Which means that I love the God who feels because he knows how I feel. So that means I don't have a God who doesn't ever change. Oh, what about that verse, God is the same today, yesterday, today, and forever? That means his character doesn't change. It doesn't mean that his feelings don't change. Right. Just like me. I can have a character that's devoted to God, and my feelings go up and down, just like David. Right? But it doesn't mean I've lost my devotion. It means I'm going to persevere through the feelings as they go up and down. So some days I'm really excited about worshiping God and following him. And some days I wonder, what in the world happened to me? Right? And I go like this, just like God does. Just takes him longer, 1,000 years at a time. Right? But the point is, he understands my feelings because he feels them. Right? Okay? So that means feelings are good things. They're not something I try to get rid of. My mother used to say, if you can't say something good about a person, don't say anything at all. You know, did you ever hear that? Oh, yeah. Oh, really? When I was a teenager, I wanted to say, and who the hell are you? This is how I feel. Of course, I couldn't say that because I couldn't say any bad, I wouldn't ever say a bad thing about somebody. So I conformed myself to my mother's version of proper social behavior, which she got from her parents, which they got from their parents, right? And all the time, we're all feeling all this stuff, and we just want to shout out, I can't stand that guy at the table. Get him out of here. You know, he's such an idiot. He's talking about this stuff. It's so stupid. I mean, you wouldn't say that, would you? Insult your guest at the table? No, but that's how you feel. Do you suppose God might feel that way? You idiots. What's the matter with you? Okay, wait a minute. Don't laugh, because in fact, that's exactly what Yeshua says. Yes. Remember when he comes down from the Mount of Transfiguration, and the disciples are doing their very best to pray over the epileptic boy, and they can't make any progress. And the father comes to Yeshua and he says, look, I believe, but help me with my unbelief, which is a really interesting thing. What does Yeshua say when he comes down and hears that they haven't been able to do anything? He says, you idiots, didn't you ever listen to what I said? I mean, that's essentially what he says in Greek. We just don't translate it that way because we don't want the Messiah to be so crude. But in fact, that's exactly what it says. He says he was angry with them, and he said, what's the matter with you? How come you can't do what I told you to do? Right? And by the way, that's not the only time he says that kind of stuff, right? We just think that since he's quote unquote God, he shouldn't have those kind of feelings because somebody told us that it's not proper to feel that way. And we use that to apply to the Messiah's life so that he becomes non-human. Okay? So I want you to go back down, read through the Gospels, and remember that he's human. And he gets tired, and he gets cranky, and he gets angry, and he gets disgusted, right? And he weeps, and he shouts for joy, and all those kind of human things that we go through. Isn't it nice? Okay. So, what does this tell us? The Greeks feared emotion. That, by the way, you grew up in the West, and that's why you have all these problems with emotional stuff. Because in the Greek world, the goal of life is balance. Have you ever heard this? You just have to have more balance in your life. The right amount of effort for business, the right amount of effort for family, the right amount of effort for church, the right amount of effort for social. You need it all in balance. Have you ever tried to do that? Let me tell you how it works for me. I start to get the balance over here, and this one goes to hell. Then I try to work on this one, and something else happens. Balance. But the Greeks believed balance was the goal of life. Everything should be rational. Okay? Emotions, of course, upset balance because they're not controllable. Okay? And therefore, for the Greeks, all emotions were a problem. The good and the bad, love and hate, anger and joy. They were all a mess. Don't have any. Okay? And we have a whole group of Greeks. There's actually a name for that whole group that practiced not feeling anything. Right? Because their view was emotions upset the rational order of the universe, and we want to be rational people. And by the way, we inherited that. We are products of Western Greek thinking, so somehow along the way we've learned to think that emotions are upsetting and we shouldn't let them take over. It's exactly the opposite of what happens in Hebrew. In Hebrew, God runs on emotional rails. The train of Israel is emotional. It goes forward when things are cooking and doing really well, and it screeches to a halt when people are angry and upset and dysfunctional. Right? God, if you start reading the Bible in terms of its emotional content, you will discover a lot more in the Scripture, and it will become very, very valuable. Because it's all about the same kinds of things that you go through. Okay? So, God can truly interact with us only to the extent that we are real. This is from S.J. Powell, a great Catholic priest. He had some really spectacular insights. God can truly interact with us only to the extent that we are real. And as Diane said, if you find a safe place and you can be safe and be who you really are, you have allowed God to interact with you more. Okay? Remember, transparent and not afraid. Okay? Finally, looking for the lost sheep. Who do you suppose Yeshua was actually looking for? Was he looking for those Jews who weren't saved? I'm going to suggest to you that looking for the lost sheep is looking for people who have not understood who they are. Right? The lost sheep of the house of Israel are not people who weren't saved. They're the people who didn't really understand who they were from God's perspective. Right? He comes to help them recover their identity. And he's doing the same thing for us. It's helping us recover our identity. How important is that? I'll tell you how important it is. If you can't do that, you won't become human. All right? So it's all tied together. If you want to become human, you got to learn to recover your identity. If you're going to recover your identity, you have to learn what God intended for you and play it out and persevere to the end. Okay? Now, I know there's more, but we're not going to do it because I want to talk about this other fun stuff. Okay? So let's, it's Evan, right? Okay, so Evan. Oh, there he's running around back there. Okay. Shut this one off. I know they're going to say, oh, no, keep going. No, sorry. Shut this one off and give me the other one, black fire, white fire, because we've done this really serious stuff now. For 3 days, we've just been serious. All this heavy language, all these vocabulary words you didn't know, all these doctrines and theology and everything else. So I think we ought to have some fun, don't you? I want you to go away remembering, oh my gosh, Skip Moen came and it was fun. Okay? Because it's not fun yet. Now you're like, oh my gosh, all this heavy thing I have to think about. Okay? So let's do something fun. Okay? We're going to do black fire, white fire. And does anybody know what black fire, white fire is? Oh, this is so cool. I'm going to introduce you. Okay, it doesn't mean that I want you to forget about all the serious stuff, right? Got it? You have to remember the serious stuff because it's serious. Okay? But I want you to have a lighter way to approach it. It's the same stuff, it's just a different pathway. Okay? And I'm going to talk to you about a real esoteric view of what's happening in the Bible according to just one group of rabbis. They're kind of radical guys, but it's really fascinating. And it's called black fire, white fire, and you'll see why in a second. Okay? So, what was that? This is the revised one, right? Okay? Analytic thought, which dissects the world into a limited number of discrete objects having particular attributes that can be categorized in clear ways. You got that, right? Yep. Okay? He's talking about Greek thinking. Greek thinking is analytical. What does it mean? It means that it takes one concept and divides it down into smaller and smaller pieces so that I can understand how it all builds up into the bigger concept. Okay? Let me give you an example. What does love mean in the New Testament? Well, that depends on which of the 4 words you use, right? There's this concept, love, ahav, in Hebrew. But in Greek, there's agape, sorge, phileo, eros. There's all this stuff about love, right? Why? Because the Greeks were analytical. They said, oh, we don't like that word love. I mean, we like the word, but what about this case? What about this case? What about this case? What about this case? And they invented words for each one of those cases. That's why the vocabulary in Greek is much, much bigger than the vocabulary in Hebrew, because they have all of these little cases. Let me give you an example. What is the meaning of car? Dodge, Chrysler, Toyota, Mercedes, Jeep. Let's go through the list, right? How many variations of the word car are there? I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens. If I was trying to teach an alien what car means, I'd go out to the street and I'd point and say, see, that's a car. It was a white Cadillac. Then a black Lincoln goes by. He says, that's not a car. Cars are white and they have a little crest on them that says Cadillac. No, I said, no. Lincoln Navigator is also a car. So then a Toyota goes by. He says, is that a car? Yeah, it can have a Toyota and say something. Well, let's go down the line. Okay, so now we start going through all the lists of car. Okay, got it? So in Greek, you need all of those. Okay? Let me explain how interesting this is in the religious idea of Greek. Right? What does the word church mean? Well, currently there are 52,000 Protestant denominations. So which one is a church? Right. Yes. Do you see what happened? In Greek, we have all of these little categories. We have an abstract term, church, and then it's made up of all these little categories, okay? So that's what he's saying. In analytic thought, we have all this stuff, and it lends itself to being captured in language. In other words, we can invent all the words for this stuff. Holistic thought, which responds to a much wider array of objects and their relations, and which makes fewer sharp distinctions among attributes and categories, is less well suited to linguistic representation. He just told you in academic terms that Hebrew is messy. Hebrew is really messy because one Hebrew word can mean 35 different things. In Greek, you need 35 different words. In Hebrew, you just need one. Hebrew is like stacking up a whole bunch of garbage cans, and you just throw everything in the can. And that's what it means, okay? That's why the Hebrew vocabulary is very sparse, and that's why interpreting Hebrew is very difficult, because so much of it depends on context and culture and where it is in the text and how the syntax works and everything else. The Hebrew is really tough, especially when you're trying to convert it into an analytic language like English, right? So what you'll discover is one Hebrew word. You can do that. You can find this out for yourself. You go to the Strong's dictionary. You look up one Hebrew word, and then Strong's will tell you all the way that it's translated in which version of the Bible. And you'll discover that one Hebrew word gets translated 30 different ways. Okay? It means all those 30 different ways. Okay? Whereas in Greek, you get 30 different words. Okay? So why is this important? Because something really amazing happens when you start squeezing all the concepts into just one or two words. Okay? And here's what we're going to find out. In Deuteronomy 33:2, there's a verse. This is about the tablets. It says, in the ESV, it says, at his right hand there was a flashing light for them. We take that to be lightning. That God, there's lightning on the mountain. Okay? All right. And if you look at the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament, you will see that the Hebrew is a sheddat. Okay? But the rabbis say, hey, wait a minute, we don't have to read it like this. We can read it as two different words, ish, hadat. And of course, when we do that, we get the translation, there was fire in his hand, not lightning, right? And of course, here's what we find out. Black ink on white parchment. Black fire and white fire. Okay? Look what this says. When we think about the Torah scroll, we usually only consider the letters themselves, written in black ink. Yet, the Talmud, Menachot 28a, rules that every letter in the Torah must be completely surrounded by parchment. You can't just make a mistake and sort of squeeze it along, right? Okay? This requirement is called Malaf Gavil. In other words, the white parchment around the letters is an integral part of the Torah. Without it, the Torah scroll is disqualified. Did you get that? If you're going to be a scribe and you're going to do a Torah scroll, you have to have exactly the right amount of white around each of the black letters. Okay? In fact, the white space is a higher form of Torah. Why? It is analogous to the white fire of Sinai. And there's the reference to Deuteronomy 33:2, the white fire of Sinai, okay? A sublime hidden Torah that cannot be read in the usual manner. In fact, it can't be read at all. It can't be spoken because it is white space, okay? I'm going to give you a piece of paper. On that piece of paper, I have written in white space an alphabet. Can you read it? Not if the paper's white. There's nothing to see. If I put a black letter on there, you can read the black letter because it is on top of the white space. But the white space is what makes the black letter readable. Okay? So the scribes of this particular thinking say, isn't it amazing? There are really two alphabets in Torah. The black letters that I can read, which are rational, that I can communicate and talk about, and the white space that I can't actually even read because it's not there. I mean, it's actually there, but it's not there. You understand what I'm saying? You can't make an alphabet out of something that you can't see. But it's there because if it wasn't there, you wouldn't be able to see the black letters. Got it? Okay? Why is this so cool? Every letter in Torah must be completely surrounded by parchment, white space. White space is a higher form of Torah. The poetry of the text has more white space. We're going to go look at some of that, okay? The greater measure of white fire is the white space. It is the foundation of all of Torah. If you didn't have white space, you couldn't even read the Torah. So obviously, the white space is a higher form of God revealing himself because it's the foundation for everything else. Okay? What is beyond the written text is the white space. So, let's go take, and this just tells you what is black fire, what is white fire. Both fires are now to be read. How are you going to do that? And here's the problem. Okay, do you recognize this? This is the scroll from the Song of Songs, right? I want you to, I probably can't even reach it, but I want you to see the spaces. Do you see that some of the spaces look like they come at the end of a sentence, but some of them come in the middle of a sentence? Okay? You can't see this in almost all printed Hebrew Bibles. Why? Because printers don't like to waste space. So they just get rid of the space because after all, you only want to read the words, right? But if you're reading a scroll, the spaces are places in the white alphabet that are absolutely important to understanding the text. Why? Because the spaces are where God is. Oh, wow. You read the black letters because they were designed for you. They were designed for you to be able to understand the instructions that he gives. But the instructions that he gives are based on him. And he is in the Torah in the white space, in the alphabet that you can't read, the alphabet that you can't write. God is in those spaces. So, what happens in this scroll text? You're reading along and you come to the end of a sentence. You should recognize immediately that the space is there because God's presence is there. And you are to stop and say to yourself, why does God want me to stop here? There must be something about his presence in the text that needs me to reflect right now on why he made his presence visible to me here. And sometimes it's in the middle of the verse, and sometimes it's at the end of the verse, and it's all over the place depending on where it actually happens to fall in the scroll. You cannot see it in the printed Hebrew Bible unless the printed Hebrew Bible follows the same pattern as the scroll. What you can find, of course, is that there's a lot more of it in poetry. There's a lot less of it in narrative. Why? Why do you suppose that there's more in poetry than there is in narrative? Because God feels, thank you very much. And when he feels, he wants you to stop and feel it too. And so you're reading along in David, and there's a big space in the middle of the sentence. And you need to stop and say, okay, why is God asking me to feel this? Because you can't read it, remember? You can't write it, you can't read it, but you can feel it. Right? Ooh, isn't that cool? Okay, let's see what happens. Yes?
Is that where we see Selah, pause and think on it?
Selah is just an instruction to the orchestra or the choir director or somebody. It's a pause, okay? But we're not talking about a written pause, because a written pause you can read. I'm talking about the pauses that you can't read because there's nothing there. And in the past, you just skipped over them because there was nothing there. But in fact, you just skipped over God's presence because God's presence was there, but it was invisible. You got it? You had a question.
Well, it was like hers, but when I read the Amplified Bible, they define Selah as saying pause and calmly think on that.
Yeah, but Selah is a written word, so it's a deliberate rational pause. This is not a deliberate rational pause. This is a vacant pause. It's a place for your meditation and reflection. If Selah means a deliberate pause that you're supposed to think about, then he's told you in the instructions what you're supposed to do. But when you come to a space like this, in one of those sentences, you see the space in the middle of the word, in the middle of the line, okay? When you come to that, you have a tendency to just read the next word. And God is saying, no, don't read the next word. Stop now and think about what's going on.
It's a safe space.
It's what?
It's a safe space.
It's a safe space, yeah. Actually, it isn't always a safe space. Sometimes the pauses are in places where you really reflect on how much God is feeling this. Okay? Yes? How do they know how to leave the spaces where they're supposed to be? God told them. I mean, think about it. How did this scroll turn out to have the spaces where it's supposed to be? Because the scribe who copied it from another scroll where these spaces were, who copied it from another scroll where these spaces were, who copied it from, you see? It's tradition that tells me where the space should be because I believe that those spaces were there on purpose. Okay? And a real scroll has the spaces exactly where they were all the way back through the history of copying the scrolls. Okay? Yes?
Does this have any parallel with the Aleph Tav that's usually deleted from the Bible? All the Aleph Tavs?
The Aleph Tavs aren't deleted. That's the pronomial marker for a direct object.
I'm talking about where Messiah said, I'm the Aleph and the Tav. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, Aleph Tav.
Yeah, but,
So,
okay. I'll just make a comment. You might not like it too much, but Christians have made a big deal out of the untranslated Aleph Tav, which basically indicates that the next word is the direct object. They've made a big deal out of that because then they can go back and argue that the Messiah is all the way through the Old Testament because there's lots of times where there's direct object markers, right? But it's a direct object marker. I mean, it's a grammatical device because in Hebrew, remember as I said before, the syntax of Hebrew isn't like the syntax of English, is it? So you don't know where the direct object is unless somebody tells you this is the direct object. And the way that they do that is to put a word in there, a two-letter word that never gets translated, that means the next word is the direct object. Okay? So since it's all over the place and Christians want to think that they have the presence of the second person of the Trinity spread all through the Tanakh, they use that as a justification for the... But if that were true, the Jews would have figured it out 1,000 years before the church came along because it's in the scrolls, right? And somehow they didn't get it. Oh, that's because they had a veil pulled over their face. That's because we thought that we need to justify the idea of a divine Messiah by finding him in the Old Testament, which we proceeded to do no matter what the verse said, right? Okay, I'm not going to follow that path because it'll get... I'm not here for controversy. Now we're going to have fun, right? And the fun is this. If the white fire is also a language, then the extra spaces are not empty. What are they for? To meditate about God. And here's how this impacts us, right? There were 1,200,000 people at the delivery of the Torah at Sinai. This is the tradition, okay? That means that everyone heard God from his own personal perspective. Because there are 1,200,000 different perspectives on hearing God, right? No two people heard it exactly the same way. The words are the same, but their journey is different, so they interpret it differently according to them, right? They also, of course, heard the 4 levels of Pardes at the same time that they heard all the rest of it, and the 72 faces of God, rabbinic idea, that were transmitted in the words, which means... if you do the calculation, there are 345,600,000 legitimate ways to interpret the text. There you go. So start working. Right? What it says, of course, is that the text has enormous fluidity because it means what it means to you. And your journey is different than every other journey that there is. And when at Sinai God delivered the revelation of the Torah, 345,600,000 different ways were understood. Okay? So how you understand it is one of the 345,600,000 ways. Isn't that nice? You just got all kinds of flexibility in how you understand how the Bible... Well, you're shaking your head like... Do we need to have, no, not you. She's going crazy because she thinks this is nonsense. There has to be one way to understand the text because we have to have the right way.
How do you know you're going down the right path? There's so many different meanings.
But you know you're going down the right path because God is speaking to you.
If there's all those different 345,600,000
Yeah.
readings,
Yes.
how do you know which path it is?
The one that you're on.
So what?
Okay? I mean, I can't tell you which path of the 345,600,000 you're on, but if you're on it, you will know which one it is because God is speaking to you and you're discovering him in the white spaces and you're trying to do Torah and you're doing one of the 345,600,000 ways of understanding it.
This is new to me, so this is like,
It's new to everybody here, I guarantee you. The best part about it is, you see how it completely removes the rigidity of doctrine. You are now free to imagine what God is doing with you.
it's God an experience. We have an experience with
You have an experience with God, and it puts you on one of the 345,600,000 paths, and you get to follow it. Isn't that terrific? And the best part is, you have a safe place with other people who are on different paths of the 345,600,000, and you get to share with them. And you are not wrong or right. You are on a path. Okay? And now you know why Jews don't have systematic theology. Okay? Paradoxes and incompatibilities are part of the deal. A text without vowels is essentially an act of interpretation just to read it, because you have to put the vowels in, right? God gave you the screenplay. You fill in the details. Every time you pick up the text, you have to put the vowels in. So obviously, it has a lot of flexibility, okay? So, Blackfire is the intellect, the rational communication, the language that's understood, it's concrete, it's speech, it's rules, it's instruction, it's obligation. Okay? Whitefire is the esoteric, beyond reason, not irrational or unreasonable, just beyond reason, a place of silence as a means of communication. It is what cannot be expressed, but it's still there. Okay? It's the thing when you're reading the Bible and you have this sense of the Spirit. That's the white space, people. That's the white space trying to speak to you, but not in words. Because words are the black letters. Right? So my suggestion is that you practice contemplation and meditation in the white spaces so that God can communicate to you in other ways besides words. Wouldn't that be nice? And of course, the only way you can do that is to have a Hebrew text that includes the spaces. So if you get a normal BH Hebrew text from Hebraica Biblica and that was printed, they just leave the spaces out because they're trying to fill up the lines. So that doesn't work. You have to get a Hebrew Bible that has the spaces in it because it follows the order of the scrolls. Okay? And then when you come to a space, you stop. You say, oh my gosh, God is in this space. What does he want me to feel? And it might actually be things that you can't articulate because after all, you can't read it and you can't write it. Go ahead.
Do they make it interlinear so there's an English version?
Yeah. No way. There is no interlinear of the scrolls. Okay? And by the way, you'd have to be able to read Hebrew to figure this out because remember, Hebrew syntax isn't the same as English, so even if you had an interlinear, it wouldn't be in the same order, would it? So the space would be someplace else. Right? No, you need a scroll. You need, remember, I showed you one. You need a scroll so that you know where the spaces are.
Yes, I agree. And I can read Hebrew, biblical Hebrew. And I love the fact that I can interpret it the way I want.
Yes.
I mean,
And
it tells a
when you come to
story.
Yeah, and when
It
you come
tells
to
many
a
stories,
space,
yeah.
you better learn to stop. Okay? Because look, the space is the opportunity for God to speak to you. And I don't mean in words. Okay? So let's see. Mark Verman, Midrashic literature, this is the Sefer Devarim 343 from Deuteronomy 33:2, teaches us that the words of Torah are compared to fire. Why? Because they warm and they burn. They're a necessity and they cause destruction. Okay? The study of Torah is to view himself as standing amidst fire. Further explanations, this is Shimon. The Torah that the Holy One, blessed be He, gave to Moses was given to him from white fire inscribed by black fire. It was fire mixed with fire, hewn from fire and given by fire, as it is written, from his right a fiery law to them. There's the same verse interpreted with the two words instead of one. And there's this really cool legend that Moses, when he was dealing with the black fire and white fire, wiped the pen over his head by mistake. You know, he's going like this and he just went like that. And that's why nobody could look at his face, because he had fire on his face from the black fire that he made by the pen mark, right? Oh, the rabbis are so ingenious. It's one of the 345,600,000 ways, okay? Moses, oh, there, I just said it. Moses' face was radiant because he was writing on black fire and white fire, and he wiped his pen across, okay? The seminal idea. So in the 19th century, Baruch Halevi Epstein said the tablets were of white fire from the holy source under the throne of glory, which is white fire, of course, holy fire. The contemporary rabbi said there's one Hebrew letter in Torah for each one of the 600,000 Israelites, right? One letter, God designated one letter in Torah for each person, each male, okay? The problem is that there are only 304,805 letters in Torah. So what are the other letters? The white alphabet, of course. This is awesome. Okay? So, it means that Torah becomes an imaginative symbol surrounded by esoteric expansions. Right? We just changed the definition of Torah from God's instructions about how we're supposed to live to an imaginative symbol surrounded by esoteric expressions. One of the 345,600,000 ways that will help you draw closer to God.
God has a sense of humor, don't
He certainly does. And the rabbis are inventive geniuses. Okay? Because look, this doesn't come, Moses didn't write this stuff. They are reading and saying, oh my gosh, let's think about it like this. Remember what I said 2 days ago? Creative exegesis, imaginative exegesis. That we have to get out of the rigid framework of theology and start realizing that the text has all of these possibilities with it. It just opens up your life so that you can just explore the Bible in a completely different way. It's about people, it's about feelings, it's about white spaces that you can't read. Okay? So, what if it's just another way to introduce what is beyond rational explanation? If we're Christians, we want apologetics. We want the evidence that demands a verdict. But let me tell you, the Bible never even tries to explain that there's a God who exists. It never gives you a single argument. Aquinas' five arguments for the existence of God it doesn't care about, right? Why? Because it's not concerned with apologetics. It's concerned with your experience of God in such a way that it changes your life and people see that. That's what it's about, right? So I'm just giving you another way to let God's word change your life. Go and find an empty space and enjoy it, right? What if white fire is a heuristic device? Do you know the word heuristic? So you're learning some vocabulary along this. I can't help it. I'm an academic, okay? Heuristic means a useful tool that may or may not be true. I'll give you okay, it's okay. It's a useful tool, okay? Let me give you an example, okay? Has anybody here ever done any construction work? Okay? When you do construction work, do you take into account the fact that the surface of the earth is curved? You're going to lay the foundation for a building, and you want to make sure that you lay the foundation so that it fits the curvature of the earth from that side to this side of the building, right? No. You don't actually worry about relativity, space-time, and all that kind of stuff when you build a building. Why? Because you assume Newtonian mechanics. You assume Euclidean geometry, that things that are flat are actually flat. They're not curved, right? We actually know that the geometry of the earth is Riemannian. It's curved geometry. It's the geometry of a sphere. But unless you're building a 5-mile-long road to test the fastest cars in the world in Europe, you don't worry about the fact that there's a curve. You do flat floors, right? You have a level that tells you if it's flat, okay? That's all based on a heuristic tool, something that isn't true but works, okay? It's not true that the world has flat surfaces. They're curved surfaces. But it works to assume that they are flat. Okay? That's heuristic. So, what if the white fire is just a useful tool? For what? It might not even be true, but that's okay. We don't care if it's true or false. We only care that it helps me contemplate the divine. Right? If I think about it, I might find it absolutely ludicrous that there's another alphabet that I can't read and can't write, and God's there and I can't ever see it, and it just seems crazy. But it's so useful, right? It's just cool to think about. And so I use it. It's okay. I don't care if it's true or false. It's just nice. Okay? All right. So that's it. You just had a good time with black fire, white fire, and now you know that you have to have a Torah scroll. Yeah. If you get a real Torah scroll, it's going to cost a fortune and take a long time. But there is, I know, at least one version of the Hebrew Bible, printed version, that actually follows the spacing. I can't remember which one, the Chumash. Okay, it follows the spacing of the scroll. Okay? Okay, so now I will entertain questions, provided I'm interested in answering them. Because there'll be some that'll just occupy too much background to deal with.
Okay, so getting back to Genesis, there's a part in there where, so the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes.
Yes.
And that the tree was desirable to make one wise. She took from its fruit and ate, and she also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. Yep. So the words with her tell me that when she was having this conversation with the serpent, he was with her the whole time.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so I don't get all these conclusions later about why he had this change of thinking, because it just seems like there was already a problem there with Adam that he didn't try to stop her.
Yeah, that's a big problem. In fact, that's the first sin. Right? The first sin isn't the woman, because actually Paul even says that. He says the woman was seduced, but Adam sinned deliberately. Okay? In other words, here's the deal. Who gets the commandment, of all the trees of the garden you may eat and feast on, but of this tree you may not? Who gets that? Adam. So the commandment wasn't communicated to the woman directly. It was communicated to Adam. So how did the woman know what the commandment was? From Adam. Does the woman repeat the commandment according to the way God gave it? No. She adds, and not touch it. Of all these trees in the garden we may eat, but of the tree in the middle of the garden, in the center of the garden, which already changes the perspective, we may not eat or touch it. Okay? So here's my argument. It's just perfectly obvious. The serpent comes along, and by the way, the verse doesn't say, and the serpent said to her, did God say? Right? It's not what it says. It says, and the serpent says to her, God said. He agrees with her. Right? God said this, fine. And then what does he do? This is the tree. Nothing happens. Nothing happens. He touches it, nothing happens. Oh, maybe I didn't touch it enough. Nothing happens. Why? Because he knows, and Adam knows, that it didn't include the commandment not to touch it. He knows that it includes the commandment not to eat it. The woman doesn't know that because the man told her not to touch it. Why would he do that? Because if you can't touch it, you certainly can't eat from it. Right? So all he did was build a fence around the commandment. The problem with building the fence around the commandment is that the serpent uses the fence to defeat the commandment. Because once he shows that nothing happens to him if he touches it, what does she conclude? It must not be true. And therefore, she can eat from it, breaking the commandment that she doesn't know didn't include touching. Right? So who committed the first sin? Adam. He lied to her. He lied to her with good intent, but it backfired. Right? So now, Adam is standing right there when the serpent says, "Did God say?" And she repeats the commandment as in the fashion that Adam told her. Why doesn't he say to the serpent, "Oh, wait a minute, that's not what God said"? Why doesn't he say that? Because he would have to admit that he said to the woman something that God didn't say. He would have to admit that he added to the commandment. So he shuts up, hoping that nothing bad will happen here, because even though he knows the commandment isn't what she said, that's what he's told her, and she believes him. Okay? So now the whole thing goes through. And she, by the way, it also says, and she saw that the tree was what? Good to eat. How I can see something that's good to eat? She would have to eat it to know that it was good to eat. You can't just see things and, how do I know it was good to eat? It looks really fabulous. White oleander looks great. You ever try eating it? It'll kill you. Okay? So the whole point is she makes all these assumptions based on what she believes is the destruction of the commandment, because the serpent is smart enough to take the one piece that Adam added and use that to defeat her. Okay? Got it? That's right. He doesn't want to say anything because he'd have to admit that he didn't tell her the truth. Yes, he was. But the problem, of course, is that his pride, which is already in the way there, gets more in the way, because as they go through this process, he ends up blaming her and God. He says, it's her fault. And God, you sent me an inferior product. Right? That's what he says. And you who sent her to me, it's your fault. Right? Oh, and if you're really interested in all of the little nuances that are there, because we've only talked about a few of them, there's a whole bunch of them that are in that text. They're all in the Hebrew. If you're really interested in that, then Guardian Angel, which now you have to order online because they got all sold. Okay? But that will take you through all of that story. There's lots more to the story than just that little nuance, which you picked up. A whole bunch of stuff going on there. And if you don't want to read it, because it's just too much to read, you can go to my website, and there's a 4-part video series on Guardian Angel, and you can just listen to me talk about it all. Okay? It's all in there. Basically the same price as the book. There was one over here someplace. Yes. I see that hand. Isn't that what the the evangelist, itinerant evangelist guys would do? They would say, "I see that hand back there," when they ask for, somebody. Raise your hand if you're going to accept Jesus. I see that hand. Of course, I always looked around to see if there were any hands, to see if they were actually seeing any hands. So, okay. Yes, ma'am. Way back there.
Pointing over there.
Oh, you're pointing to her. Oh, so I don't have to actually see you. I can see her.
Why don't you point to me?
You're pointing to... Oh, no, kidding. All right. I'm waiting. Hit it.
Okay, regarding the Aleph Tav reference,
Yes.
and how I learned that the Aleph Tav was a messianic clue of the Messiah coming up.
Yeah, it's because you believe the Christian interpretation of it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So tonight is new information. I like it, and I'm riding a backwards
Okay.
bicycle. Okay. So there is the apocryphal books or the non-Torah books that,
Oh, something happened.
like Jubilees and Yashar.
Jubilees, yeah, okay.
And those don't have the Aleph Tav in it. So my thought here is.
Okay, wait. They don't have the Aleph Tav because,
Why?
well, are they written in Hebrew or in Greek?
Well, you're answering the question.
Yeah. Because if they're written in Greek, they don't need the Aleph Tav, do they? Because Aleph Tav is a direct object marker in Hebrew, but not in Greek. So if you're reading a book that has a Greek origin, it won't have that in it. If you're reading a book that has a Hebrew origin that doesn't have the Aleph Tav as a direct object marker, it's probably because by the time the syntax of Hebrew got to the place where Jubilees was written, which is post-Babylonian, right? They started to change the syntax of the grammar of Hebrew. Okay? Because languages evolve.
What was Enoch?
Enoch, 1st century BCE.
BC. Okay. So Greek was around at that point.
Oh, absolutely. Hellenism was from the 4th century BC on.
As a Christian, I had to learn that Greek was around. What? Okay.
Greek was around from the 8th century BC. Okay? Oh, and by the way, you might be really interested in this, just as an aside, right? Somebody asked me about the heaven and hell thing. There's a lecture that I did on the origins of hell, and in that lecture, we talk about the cult of Dionysus, which comes from Persia in the 8th century BCE and infects Greek thinking in the 8th century BCE, so much so that it had to be outlawed because all the women were going out in the forest and getting drunk, okay? That was the whole idea. You get drunk and then the god possesses you, okay? So the cult of Dionysus had a big impact on Plato and Aristotle because they were in opposition to that stuff when they moved toward a rational explanation of the universe. But the cult of Dionysus began in the Persian Empire, and you can see its traces from the 8th century BCE into, guess what? The pre-Babylonian Israel culture, where if you look at the architecture, you can start finding this stuff in the archaeology of Israel before the Babylonian captivity, right? One of the reasons that Israel went into Babylon is because they started letting all this stuff in. Sure. And there's a really great book called Dionysus, I think. I have to get the name of the guy. He's a big European scholar who wrote about all this stuff. Yes.
Okay. Yeshua said.
Okay, you have to speak louder
Here,
because my
use this
hearing
one.
is really bad.
Yeah.
Yeshua said,
Not, I am the Alpha and Omega. My understanding is, I am the Aleph and the Tav.
yeah, but you
So
just
when you,
okay, wait a minute. You just converted a Greek beginning letter and an end letter into a Hebrew letter.
a
right?
Hebrew beginning letter and a Hebrew ending letter.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, what we understood then, when Yeshua said, I am the Aleph and the Tav,
Yes.
that's, Yeshua is the one that started it
Yeah.
for people to say, oh, here he is all through
Yeah.
the Tanakh.
Okay, but
So
wait a-
you're saying it's
okay, wait a minute.
a Christian ideal.
No, yeah,
It's
of course
him.
it is. Of course it is. Because listen, when he says, I am the Alpha and Omega, what does he mean? I'm the beginning and the end. He doesn't mean I'm the direct object marker. Right? I have to take the direct object marker, which is an Aleph and a Tav, together and say, oh, you see, because he used Alpha and Omega in Greek, John, right? John writes in Greek. He used Alpha and Omega in Greek, which means Aleph Tav in Hebrew. It must mean that every time there's an Aleph Tav, he's referring to himself. But that's a Christian idea. The Jewish idea is translate Alpha and Omega. I'm the beginning and the end. That's all it means. I'm the beginning and the end. Right? Okay, wait a minute. In the beginning, he was the Word? Where'd you get that? It is 1 John. Is that what John means? Wait a minute. Is that what John means? And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Is that what the verse says? In the English it does. Oh, terrific. It's in the English. But in Greek, it's a neuter. It means, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and it was, not he. That's an introduction of a Trinitarian idea into a Greek sentence. And what is John trying to do? Is he trying to tell you that Yeshua was always around, the pre-existent Christ? Or is he just pretending that you should be reading his letter like you read Genesis? Yes. Yes. Is that right or wrong? Yes. Okay? It's a lot more complicated than we want to make it out, right?
But it actually fits because...
It actually fits because it's like Genesis.
Well, better sheep are looking at. Now you got the fourth letter, the fourth word, and then you've got in the beginning was the word, and the word is the Aleph Tav, which is all that, Dala, Hey, Bob, Zion, Tet, Tet, Kaf, Lamed, Mem. And so you can't create it. Otiot, right?
I'm so glad. I just want you to go talk to a Jewish rabbi. They had the text a long time before we did. Right? See what they say. One more? No more?
Okay, yeah, I've got a couple more, but just a reminder, please don't speak unless we bring you a microphone. We are recording, and we need the audience to be able to hear. So, okay, I've got one right here, and I've got one over there.
Okay, thank you. I will try to speak as slow as I could because a lot of people don't understand my language.
Okay.
Okay.
What is your language?
Question. Is a dialects, English, British, and French.
Okay, perfect.
So, I have to speak a little bit slower to understand, to make you understand.
Yes, of course.
Okay, you want to hold it? Okay, thank you. Question. From the beginning of when, before God threw the angels out, my first question, where did sin begin or rebellion begin?
Okay. So the Christian answer is sin began when the fallen angels and Hasatan revolted against God in the celestial heavens, and that's where sin was, and that's why Paul says not that Adam caused sin, but that Adam opened the door and let sin in. Okay? That's the Christian answer. Okay? The textual critical answer is that mythology was incorporated in order to explain to Isaiah's audience certain things that Isaiah's audience needed to know about the relationship between God and the present king. Okay? The Jewish answer is, it depends. Okay? Okay? So you choose one of the 345,600,000 ways. And in other words, I'm being a little facetious, but what I'm telling you is I can't answer that question because behind that question are mountains and mountains of theological assumptions. And if you really, really want to explore the theological assumptions, then I suggest that you read Roy Blizzard's book on he has a commentary on Caesarea Philippi and the statements that Yeshua made to his disciples when he confronted what was popularly known as the doorway to hell, the big cave at Caesarea Philippi. And you can find that online. And you can find it on my website if you put in Roy Blizzard, because I have the whole thing right there. Talks about Lucifer, this falling star, the whole thing, right? Okay? And by the way, it's all related to the cosmology of the ancient world. All right? It's all about how they understood what the stars were about. It's almost like, what's the thing? Oh, horoscopes. It's almost like horoscopes. Okay? But it's a really, really long answer, so. Okay?
Yeah, so I've got a question. I'm going to take it a little bit different way than what we've currently been talking about. But based on what we've talked about, you've talked about identifying our feelings and things based on our feelings. Be true to yourself, like the creation of like safe spaces, and in like a lot of these in like relative truth based on experience, stuff like that. Like those things are really common doctrines in the world right now that generally the church is kind of against in some form or fashion, or they gets made fun of. Are we really missing it that bad that like the world accepts all of these things and we're like, yeah, nah, we don't need that? Like, it kind of seems like, you see what I'm saying?
I would suggest, I understand what you're saying. I would suggest that the world isn't like that at all. That the world is moving very quickly toward a believe exactly what I believe or we'll get rid of you. Okay? So it's much less tolerant than maybe it was 50 years ago, but it's quickly moving toward what will eventually become a dictatorial control of the vocabulary and the media and everything else, okay? Right. So the church, as it moves along this path, became very liberal in its approach to what you've suggested, just how you feel and, what does God mean to you and all that kind of stuff, as though there were no absolutes, right? It's all relative. And I don't want you to be confused. There are absolutes. It's called the 613 commandments of Torah. No, 619, okay? 619, those are absolutes. The problem is that they're absolutes for you depending on how they impact you, right? So somebody asked me yesterday, how many of the 619 commandments of Torah do I have to keep? And the answer is, as many as you can. Because a whole bunch of them don't apply to you, right? So the first thing you do is go through and say, okay, this is what God wants me, these are the black letters. This is what God wants me to know. This is how he wants me to live. What number of the 619 actually apply to me? And my suggestion is by the time you're done, it'll be 10 or 20 of the ones that you aren't already doing, okay? Those are absolute, right? Number one, believe that there's a God. Absolute. What's the point of doing all this if we don't believe that there's a God? Okay? So there's some absolutes. Okay? Honor the Sabbath. Okay? Now I'm going to be on one of the 345,600,000 paths of what that means, but the absolute is honor it. In some way or another, I've got to determine that. Okay? Do not murder. It's not kill, it's murder. Okay? So there's an absolute. Now I have to figure out what does that mean. In my system, in my society, there's first degree, second degree, manslaughter, I have to figure all this out. Okay, where do I stand? And particularly where do I stand on the issue of abortion? Is that murder or isn't it murder? And then I'm going to have to look through the Torah to find out what happens when there was a financial penalty for the termination of a pregnancy rather than a capital offense. Okay, it's all in there. I just have to noodle it out. So once I've got those absolutes in place, then I'm on the relative side, which is I'm one of the 345,600,000 ways of reading this. And by the way, Diane agrees with me, so she's right. and Robert doesn't agree with me, but we'll convince him. You see, now I've got relativity. I've got some flexibility. So I'm not going to say, and by the way, if you don't believe exactly as I believe, you're going straight to hell. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200, right? Because there's flexibility. But we're not going to have flexibility over believe that there's a God, honor the Sabbath. We might have different ways of honoring the Sabbath, but we don't have flexibility over the place markers, okay? So I would argue that there are both absolutes and relatives in the Jewish view, right? And if you sit down with the Orthodox Jew, you probably discover that because they have a real good sense of the situation and how it applies. But they will never give up the idea that Torah has commandments and you're supposed to keep them, right? Does that help? Okay. Not anything like the world or the church, by the way. The church dumps Torah, so then it has nothing but relative ethics. Right? It basically has an ethical system based on Greco-Roman thinking, not on the Bible, because they just got rid of Moses. And as a result of getting rid of Moses, by the way, the world is set for a real disaster. Okay? The world, on the other hand, is moving in the direction of power because they don't want relative ethics either. They want absolute ethics, control. Okay? So we're the only ones who have both an absolute base and the flexibility to deal with the circumstances. Okay? One more.
This is part of Scripture that's always troubled me.
Loud.
There's a section of Scripture that has always troubled me. And when you're talking about the emotions of God, and, you know, it's real clear that God has emotions, but I'm really troubled by that Scripture that says, Esau I hated and Jacob I loved.
Ah, okay.
If you'd like to comment.
Oh, you're troubled by it. Why?
Because it sounds like God rejected Esau before he did anything.
No, it sounds like God hated Esau.
Yeah, but why?
Right. But it doesn't mean Esau the person. He's talking about, you know, Jacob is a term that's used for the collective of Israel, right? What should I do with my son Jacob? And he means the whole people. And so in this case, he's comparing how Esau, the whole people that came from Esau, and the whole people that came from Jacob are impacting him. Okay? And now you get to go ask yourself, what does the Hebrew word mean that's translated hate? And maybe it's not going to be quite the same as what you think hate means, which is a burning desire to get even, vengeance, revenge, you know, kill them all, that kind of stuff. Right? There's a difference. Right? Doesn't Yeshua say that? Doesn't he say, if you don't hate your father and your mother, you're not worth. Okay, does he mean hate? You have to say, you know, screw you. I don't want to be part of this family, and you did everything bad to me, and I'm going to get even with you and go to hell. Right? Is that what he means? No. Go and look at the Greek terms and the Hebrew terms, and you'll discover it's not quite how we translate it.